So now we'll go ahead and dive in. The first question I have for you both, why is it important to make sustainable travel choices?
I think that travel has a really singular ability to open our eyes to the beauty and the majesty of our world. It teaches us, it puts us in touch with our own humanity and our sort of connection to not just other humans, but other species and just the beautiful world we live in. And, as amazing as travel it also is associated with harmful, negative environmental and social impacts. So it's just really important to be mindful that, at its best, power actually has the potential and the ability to sort of preserve the beautiful cultures and environments that we visit. But when not done consciously, it can be a detriment to those things.
Yeah, I second everything that Rose said. That totally resonated. I think it's obviously like the right thing to do, considering the fact that we are living through a climate crisis and we need to do everything we can to protect the ecological wonders of our planet, but also be mindful of the local communities that inhabit the destinations that we visit, because they are first places where people live, and second places where we visit. But I think on a more personal level, I think we all want our travels to change us from within. And I think for that reason, it's really important to make better travel choices because they're also more immersive travel experiences. And so if we really want personal growth, we want to broaden our worldview, then this is the direction that we should be thinking in.
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely true. And I love what both of you shared. And if you would, could you both share a story or personal anecdote from your experiences with eco-conscious or climate-conscious travel?
Sure. So I think one thing that pops into mind when we think about eco-conscious travel is to fly less. And so something that I did last year was I needed to be in Switzerland for work. And my partner and I really wanted to travel to the Arctic and experience the midnight sun. But we also felt really guilty about our flying emissions. So we decided to do something really adventurous, and we embarked on a really long train journey all the way from the Swiss Alps, and we traveled through the agricultural region of Germany, through the prairie-like landscapes of Denmark, through the fjords of Norway, and then we reached the end of the train line in Buda, and then finally we took a public ferry to the Lofoten Island. And of course, it would have been a lot quicker to hop on a cheap flight from Switzerland to the Arctic, but just taking this journey allowed us to connect so much deeper with the landscape that we passed through, but also with all the people we met along the way on those really long train rides and every place that we broke our journey into. And so the journey really became part of the destination. And so it was so much more immersive than just flying there.
That's great. Thank you. And Rose, do you have a story to share as well?
Yeah, I would say, most of my travels at this point are grounded in sustainability or in conservation. But, one of my favorite companies and one of my favorite sort of places to visit is in the US. I've been doing a lot more US travel lately, just because it's where I'm from. And I think there's so much to explore here. But I absolutely love what Ted Turner Reserves does. So Ted Turner has a lot of land in the United States. A lot of it is protected sort of under different sort of conservation deeds. And he has 3 ranches that you can go visit and participate in the conservation that he's actively engaged in. And it's amazing. These ranches are all in New Mexico. Lots of wildlife to see. It's kind of like being in a national park, but without all the crowds. And so my last trip was in May. I like to go back often. New Mexico is a beautiful state if you haven't visited. And yeah, I've just really been enjoying exploring the US and staying more local.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thanks so much for sharing. Certainly a beautiful state, and we'll share the link in the comments with folks if they're interested in checking out that organization. So now let's talk a little bit about travel planning, and we can just start at the beginning of the vacation planning process. So if someone's interested in making sustainable travel choices and taking that step, where do you recommend they start? Or could you share resources, ideas for climate friendly transportation options in terms of long or short time or long distance or short distance travel. So flights or trains or cars. Do we want to start with Rose? Do you have any ideas or suggestions?
Well, the good thing is a lot of this information is a lot more accessible than it used to be. So even if you look on Google Flights, it's going to give you a sense of whether the itinerary you're looking at is sort of higher emissions or lower emissions than the standard for that particular route. So that's a great place to start. It's just to try to start to be mindful of, flights are generally going to be the biggest bulk of your carbon emissions. So trying to kind of approach those with some consciousness around what you're emitting when you travel. And like I said, Google Flights, I'm sure there are other search engines that also provide some flight data. And then just to kind of remember as a general rule of thumb that, shorter haul flights tend to be the most carbon intensive. So when you're planning a trip somewhere, it's really great to think about how you can stay in one place longer. And again, this goes back to something that Shivya said, that really does make for a better trip experience. I think that a lot of people have this idea because, especially in the US and I think other countries, we don't have a ton of vacation time. So we want to get everything we can out of it. So sometimes people feel like they want to go, to Europe and hit 5 capital cities in 10 days. And I would just really encourage people to think about how they can slow down and really immerse themselves in one destination, maybe throw in a train ride, throw in some sort of alternate forms of transportation, get a bicycle, explore a town, and really just embrace this slow, immersive sort of approach to travel. And you are going to also cut down drastically on carbon emissions, but have a much better trip.
Yeah, so I think one great way to get started is to, even before looking at transport options, is to think about the choice of destination. And I think what we're seeing right now is that, Instagram creates so much FOMO, or even TikTok and the rest of social media threads and whatnot. And a lot of times we just want to go to a place because, we see all these pretty pictures and everyone's posting about it. So it feels like we should be there as well. But I think we need to take a step back and ask ourselves, why are we traveling somewhere? Like, do we feel maybe a connection to the place in some way? Are we curious about its cuisine or its culture or its architecture or something else? And then also, do we have an option to visit this place in off season, or maybe ditch that popular place and go somewhere that's under the radar? Because I know it's not fair to compare destinations, but like for example, going to a place like Tajikistan, which receives very little tourism, will have a much deeper impact on the local economy and the money you spend there as a tourist. But also the kind of cultural interactions you have will be a lot more authentic than, let's say, going to a place which is plagued by over tourism, like a European city like Amsterdam or Berlin. So really thinking about the choice of destination makes a huge difference. And then just adding on to what Rose said, if you can travel closer home and take a train or a bus instead of going on a flight, then that dramatically reduces your carbon emissions. But if that's not an option, then, like Rose mentioned, short haul flights have a huge carbon emission because most of the emissions happen during takeoff and landing. So if there's an option to fly direct instead of taking a layover, then that reduces emissions as well. And I know economy sucks, but flying economy is, half the emissions of flying business. So if you can make that choice, that's a great place to start as well.
That's great. Those are all great pieces of advice, and I'm already learning a lot. I didn't realize. So that's fantastic. The next question I have is about booking places to stay and accommodations. What are your tips for finding or booking sustainable accommodation options in the destinations that folks are traveling to?
Well, I think so. So if you are approaching it sort of from, resources emission standpoint, you can find hotels that are really transparent with environmental sort of statistics and do annual reports and things like that. I would imagine most travelers aren't going to book hotels and go seek out that information. A lot of hotels don't have it available. So instead, what I might suggest is really looking for something local, I think that they're, again, kind of linking the sustainability piece to having the best quality trip you can have. One of the ways to really do that is to find, a locally owned hotel that is really embedded in the local community, that employs local community members, that is infused with local culture, that, has a very local supply chain. So not only are they employing, their employees local, but they're, the food that they're using and sort of the products that they sell, and even maybe how the hotel was built has a real sort of local, authentic vibe to it. So I would really encourage that, think local, and how can you really experience the location of where you're going to the fullest.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with what you say, Rose. I think I'd just like to add that, a lot of times we just go for the comfortable option, which is like maybe a chain hotel because we know exactly the kind of experience to expect. But I could stay in like a big chain hotel in, say, New Delhi or in the US, and the experience will be more or less the same. And I think when you pick something local, something that's maybe family run or community run or boutique, then you tend to have a more wholesome experience of the destination. So I remember a few years ago, I traveled to Bali and I stayed in this in a really sweet eco lodge on the outskirts of Ubud. And so they had like a huge private, reserve that they had protected and built with local materials. And they were also really socially involved with the community. But the really cool thing was that they also had a private waterfall within the reserve. And they used that waterfall to generate hydroelectricity, which powered the lodge. So it was actually really, low carbon, but also really immersive and a really, it's such a beautiful experience of Bali and, really experiencing the nature within the islands. So just choosing local is so much more powerful, both on a personal level and on an environmental level as well.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you both. Great advice and good kind of ways to think about where you're going and where you're staying as you develop your plans. So my next question is about packing. What advice do you have for folks as they're packing for trips? Do you have any easy ideas or insights or tips on packing in a climate conscious way?
Sure. So I kind of lived out of two bags for about 7 years before the pandemic, and just spent time in different places. And I think doing that made me realize that we actually need so much less than what we want to carry with us. So my best advice is to pack light because I think that just reduces our emotional burden as travelers. But at the same time, from an emission standpoint, especially if you're flying, then every kg of weight on board makes a difference. So if you can reduce the amount of weight that you're carrying on board, then you've reduced your carbon emissions as well. So that's my best advice.
I second that. And then again, sort of tying it to the better trip experience, especially if you're traveling far, there were so many instances of lost luggage over the past since the pandemic. Like flights are really the airlines are really, have struggled to kind of regain efficiencies and everything. And so, we were really encouraging people to pack light and only take carry-ons for a variety of reasons, but namely so you don't lose your luggage. And like Shivya, I'm very, very skilled now at packing for, up to 3 weeks with just a carry-on. It's really possible. Packing cubes are great. They can help you fit, lots and lots, and just think strategically.
Yeah, that's great advice. Thank you. And I know I often will bring like reusable bags for my toiletries and such rather than using plastic items. I know that's another probably easy thing to implement when you're packing for trips, just thinking about making sure you bring reusable bags for groceries or for your toiletries and cosmetics. I'm sure there's lots of great options out there for packing implements or containers you can buy to keep your storage sustainable when you travel. So I know that's something I've done the past year to try to make my packing a little more climate conscious. Well, that's great. My next question is about Climate Corps. Rose, you're an alumni of EDF's Climate Corps Fellowship, and Shivya, you're a current EDF Climate Corps Fellow. And so I'd love if you could both just tell me a little bit about what Climate Corps is and what your experience doing EDF's Climate Corps program has been like. Do we want to start with Shivya? I know you're currently in the program. I'm so happy to pass it over to you, and then we can move to our alumni.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So I'm in the last week of my fellowship now, and I would say it's been an intense but a fulfilling experience. So I've worked in the tourism sector for the last over a decade now, But I just wanted to try something different and, see if that's for me, which is my second interest in agriculture. And so I'm working with the National Solar Energy Federation of India. And as part of the fellowship, we are looking at how we can build policy frameworks around agri-PV, which is the co-use of land for both solar and agriculture. And it's still something very new and untested in India. So I'm specifically looking at how business models of agri-PV could be made, more inclusive for women farmers. Because one of the challenges we have here in India is that women do all the work on the farms, but mostly land rights are not in their name. So how do we kind of, work around that societal conditioning to actually make these models beneficial to women? So I've been out on the field in one of the villages that I live in, and it's been incredible to talk to some of these women farmers and really relate to them on an entirely different level. And then we also organized a roundtable of stakeholders who are part of the agri-PV ecosystem. So right from solar providers to research companies to academia and so on. And it's been an incredible learning journey, just bringing everyone together and seeing how we could build policies that benefit everyone from the top of the chain to, all the way to the farmer. So yeah, it's been a great experience so far.
So I was in Climate Corps in 2021 and have also worked in the travel industry for some time, but also wanted to explore other industries and kind of see, how other industries are approaching sustainability. I've always really, actually, Shivya and I are also part of the same graduate program, so I just graduated, but when I wanted to, further my studies, I wanted to go to sort of a broad sustainability program, not just a sustainable tourism program. And I think also Climate Corps offered the opportunity to really sort of broaden my skill set and understand how other industries are approaching climate and sustainability issues. So I worked for a software company, and it was like their first sort of sustainability employee. I ended up contracting with them for several months afterwards to complete some of the work that I did, but they were really looking to initiate a sustainability strategy from sort of the ground up. And so it was everything from, helping them conduct their first greenhouse gas assessment to kind of just looking at providing a framework with which they could really grow their sustainability program. So it was great. I learned a ton. It was just a really valuable experience.
That's fantastic. Yeah, thank you both for sharing. And for those tuning in that don't know, EDF's Climate Corps program is our kind of innovative fellowship program aimed at training graduate students and pairing them with companies and institutions that are determined to meet their climate and energy goals. So folks are matched with companies or institutions and help to implement those goals, as Rose and Shivya just gave great examples of. So thank you both for sharing on that quick aside from our sustainability discussion on travel choices. So now we'll dive into what I think is our last question. I know we've talked a lot about ways for individuals to make climate conscious choices as they travel this summer, but I'm wondering what role you both think, tourist destinations and tourism businesses play in providing information and offering sustainable options. So, how do you work with tourism businesses and destinations looking to reduce their emissions, and what advice do you have on that topic? And I know you both do work in this field, so I'm sure there's a lot to share, but do we want to start with Shivya? What do you have on that question? I know your company is really focused on working with tourist destinations and businesses.
Yeah, so I think to address the first part of the question, what role do destinations and businesses have to play? I think they have a crucial role, both of course in reducing, their emissions, but I think also in educating travelers about the impact of climate change. Because, when we're out there in a new destination, we're so much more open to receiving new ideas and being inspired to take action when we go home. So I think it's really a lost opportunity when, maybe someone goes on an expedition somewhere or goes on a sightseeing trip to a glacier and nobody talks about climate change. I think if we have these conversations right at the point of impact, it can really compel us to, become so much more engaged in the climate movement, and we really need that momentum right now. And so I think destinations and businesses have a crucial role to play there. And in terms of how they can work to reduce their emissions, so one of the things we're doing at Climate Conscious Travel is working with both accommodations and tour operator to see how we can measure their greenhouse gas emissions, so their scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, and then also looking at their supply chain emissions to see how we could reduce those, and where reduction is not possible, to develop meaningful community-based projects where there are that help remove carbon, but at the same time have co-benefits for the local communities in the regions that they work in. So there's a lot of work to be done. And I think also for destinations and businesses, it's important to realize that tourism not only contributes, I think, about 8% of global greenhouse gas emissions, but it's also really vulnerable to the impact of climate change. So, for example, I think I was reading just this morning that the wildfires in Greece are really out of control, and they are directly related to climate change, which means there's going to be huge tourism impact on Greece. And this is playing out, in destinations around the world with like wildfires, flooding, heat waves, and so on. And so destinations also really need to start thinking about what happens when the kind of tourism they have right now completely changes because of the weather patterns or extreme weather events and so on. And so I think just realizing that crucial link between tourism and climate change is really, really important.
That was excellent. I think that just to reiterate, I think that destinations and tourism businesses have a huge role. There's a pretty large, body of research that supports that people want to travel sustainably, but it can be very daunting to figure out how to do that. And furthermore, it can be it's not necessarily going to be top of mind when you're thinking about vacation. Again, kind of going back to this idea that, we only have so many vacation days. We're really looking to not be burdened by, things like the existential threat of climate change. So I think it's really important for businesses to take the onus off the consumer and to try to really figure out how they can drive impact and how they can actually sort of support the destinations that they're operating in and be sustainable. So there's a massive, I think there's a massive mandate for businesses and destinations. And I think from my experience, a lot of businesses don't necessarily know where to start. I think picking a framework can be really, really helpful. There are some specific certifications relating to sustainable tourism. And then there's sort of broad frameworks that I think are super valuable, like B Corp, and even if you're not going to pursue B Corp certification, it's a daunting certification. It's hard to achieve. Anyone can do their free assessment and use their assessment tool to gauge where their business is at, and it sort of looks at a very broad range of questions from environmental to community to employees. And I think it can provide some really great benchmarking information.
Great. Thank you, Rose. And thank you both so much for being a part of this conversation. That concludes the questions I have for you. But if there's any final advice or piece of wisdom either of you wants to leave our members and viewers with today on how to make sustainable travel choices, feel free to hop in.
I would just say, if there are things in your backyard you haven't explored, just go for it. I just had the opportunity. My best friend was just visiting me from Georgia. I'm in Northern California, not too far from Tahoe. And we just spent the week, swimming and finding swimming holes I haven't found before, hiking, kind of just scrambling around. And it was so much fun. And it was just such a great reminder that, within an hour of me, and I think this is true for probably a lot of people, there's so much to explore, just spectacular nature. And it was just so deeply nourishing to my heart and soul. So I really encourage you to explore your backyard.
Yeah, I think that's really great advice from Rose, and I totally second that. I think the other thing I want to add is that the idea of sustainability can sound really daunting, but it's really about taking that first step and then taking the next step. So just take that first step that feels really easy to you, and just think of it as a journey that you can keep exploring. And it's something that environmentally, but also on a more personal level in terms of your personal growth. I think it's something that you just keep taking the next step till you feel like you're getting somewhere. And yeah, don't think of it as a burden or something that you absolutely have to do, but just something as a something that's going to be fun as you go along.
Thank you. I love that. Great advice. I know it certainly is a journey, and many with us today are just taking their first steps. So big thank you to both of our speakers. So appreciate you being here, and we will jump back into the live program.